Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Breakout podcast. We are on episode 3 of the final 5. I am one of your hosts, Ethan.
And I'm Akira.
And today we have a guest. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah. Hi, I'm Brad Bowen. I'm an attorney at Danko-Meredith, just down the street from your school at Twin Dolphin Drive. And so I'm excited to be here.
Awesome. All right. Thank you for joining us today. We know it probably to fit in your schedule, so we appreciate it. Just to start off, we know you were a social worker, and we were wondering what your experience was like as a social worker.
Yeah. So after college, my first real kind of full-time job after college was working with what was then called Shelter Network. They envisioned Shelter Network, and now it's called Life Moves. And they provide all the homeless shelter care in San Mateo County and most of the shelters in Santa Clara County for homeless individuals and families. In particular, after a while, the job I landed at there was being an outreach case manager for individual homeless. So that's with people who kind of live on the street long term. These are the people camped out under the 84 overpass by the freeway, by the railroad tracks, every place where, behind bushes, you find trails. We would go back there and talk to them and try and hook them up with services and kind of bring them into the fold.
Awesome. Yeah, that's cool. Akira?
Next question. What was your experience at Boulder studying political science and international affairs?
Yeah. So it was college. It's fun. I just kind of started taking classes that I liked, and 2 years into it, I had to pick a major. So saw which classes I'd taken the most of and went with that. But it's interesting. It's especially kind of today, it's nice to have that background with what's going on internationally and politically here, just to be kind of literate in those topics. But, school-wise, it was pretty boring. Learned a bunch of dates, learned a bunch of theories, write essays, definitely writing intensive.
Right.
So you didn't go into it knowing that you wanted to pursue political science, or no?
No, I kind of, really liked my civics class in high school. Knew that was something I was pretty interested in. But no, I went to college with a pretty open mind of doing whatever I ended up liking the most. So I signed up for extra classes each semester, tried to take as many different weird things as I could to see if that's what did it for me. And
All right. Akira?
So we heard you were studying abroad in Spain, and so we just wanted to ask how that was like.
That was probably the most fun 6 months of my life. So if you have the opportunity to do it, you should really go do it.
Awesome.
I lived with a host family there that didn't speak any English. So, I actually, by the time I got back, was actually pretty good in Spanish. I had started dreaming in Spanish, thinking in Spanish, as opposed to thinking in English, translating it to Spanish, going back and forth that way. So that was amazing cultural, experience. Really started my love of traveling, which is what my wife and I spend all of our time doing now when we're not working. Mm-hmm. So it was an amazing experience, and whether it's Spain or anywhere else, if you can go learn and experience another culture, I think it really helps your worldview in a lot of ways.
Yeah, awesome. And then we know that after, or maybe it was during, you interned for Dianne Feinstein, and I was wondering, how was that?
Yeah, so Senator Feinstein, that was a really good internship. I was in her San Francisco field office, so with a bunch of people there. Some of them are still at the office, still talk to. Went to one of their weddings last 2 years ago now. Had some of them at my wedding 3 years ago. So it's a great kind of community, doing a lot of good work. I really like Senator Feinstein in general. She's perhaps not as liberal as some people around the Bay Area want her to be, but she's really trying to focus on getting stuff done. And proposing things that can pass and working to make improvements as opposed to yelling about what we want. So I'm a pretty big supporter of hers, and as kind of a funny twist of fate, her daughter actually interned with my mom when she was in college. So we interned with each other.
That's pretty fun. Wow. So when you were there, were you thinking about that being a long-term, a possible career, or was it really just the experience and getting to feel around for it?
I was. It was definitely exploring that as a job, kind of postgraduate job there. So ended up really liking the social work, so it didn't end up going back to it. But no, that was definitely something I did thinking it would be a career.
Cool. Right. Okay.
Next question. What started off for you, and what made you know that you wanted to become a lawyer eventually?
Yeah, so kind of one of those, I don't know, I guess classic stories, at least the people that I talked to in law school, where your whole life kind of people are telling you, oh, I'll bet you're going to be a lawyer, right? So you probably talk back a little bit more than you should. You're probably a little bit, smart alecky growing up. But so I kind of always had it in the back of my mind that if enough people tell you that, there must be some kind of kernel of truth there. But in particular, really, there were a few things. One, I graduated college in 2009 during the big economic downturn. So it's not like there were a whole lot of other jobs out there. So I started studying for the LSAT when I was unemployed, taking that kind of full time, taking it serious. So that helped a lot. And then, later on when I actually started applying and taking the LSAT, at that point I'd done social work for a while, and I got pretty disillusioned with the law, I guess, before I even started, seeing how people who are living on the streets, where basically everything they do is illegal. Half the things you do in your house are illegal to do if you don't have a house. Right? You can't shower, you can't go to the bathroom, you can't sleep outside legally in a lot of places. So got kind of disillusioned with that, and really got disillusioned with how, as the victims of a lot of crimes, people who are living on the streets basically get no justice for things that are done to them. They typically don't make the most reliable witnesses, and so district attorneys try not to file the cases as often, I think, and the police are less likely to send them to the DA for filing. So I really wanted to start going to law school, really to try and fight for them. And, that's why when I went to law school, I did it because I wanted to be a district attorney.
That's awesome. So you knew that being a lawyer was something that you'd probably be good at, but you would say that you were driven by the fact that there were these injustices happening to homeless citizens.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if that's the entire reason. I probably would have ended up in law school either way, but that's certainly why I chose to go to the school that I did, and take the classes I did, and kind of focus on that in school. Was really my experience with dealing with people living on the streets.
Mm-hmm. Cool. Kira?
Oh, okay. So we heard about the Space Law Society, so just wanted to ask about that. Yeah,
so we called it UC Spastings. So I went to school at UC Hastings. We renamed it there for our club. It was pretty fun. It was a group of guys that we all like talking about kind of new exploration, space tech, what's going to be happening in the future. And then since we're in law school, we started to look at the legal side of it. What does it mean if you launch a rocket and there's a crime committed on the space shuttle? What happens? If you go to the moon, can you claim it like you used to claim territory by sailing around the world? How's all this work? How does it actually work? It becomes less far-fetched to think of people actually trying to own things in space. And as we start potentially living up there and spending more time up there, all the other issues that are going to crop up that aren't issues on Earth because they've been settled for 10,000 years, but are going to be a lot different in space. So we just wanted to look at that. I don't think anybody in the club actually ended up going into space law. It was
Yeah.
really just kind of a passion thing. But they invited us to present to the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals, which was pretty cool. That's up in San Francisco, and that was a pretty unique and great opportunity to go present to their staff.
So would you say that like it was just discussions in that club, or?
Yeah, mostly discussions and kind of updating each other on what's going on. Hey, I wonder what this is. Hey, okay, Bobby and David, you guys are going to look into this for our next meeting and kind of give us an update on what asteroid mining is like. And what do we think might apply.
A fun club. All right, cool.
Fun.
Yeah, fun for kids in law school.
Yeah.
I don't know that's how getting homework from your club usually isn't too fun.
Yeah, gotcha. Akira?
So, like you said, you went to Hastings. So, would you like to tell us a favorite memory from there?
Ooh. I don't know that there's a lot of good memories from law school, but I think both the surprising one and the one that lingers the most is just how nice everybody was. You hear about school, and Hastings in particular had the reputation of being really cutthroat and kind of tearing the pages out of library books so that the next guy can't learn what he needs to know for the test so that you get a better grade. And it just wasn't like that at all. There's a lot of very good friends that I've still have from school. Again, going to weddings, being in weddings with them, and just how nice and how much of a community it felt. It really was very welcoming and warm, as opposed to kind of the harsh reality that some movies and TV shows make it seem like.
I've never heard of that. Tearing out pages of the book? That's pretty brutal.
Yeah. It's supposedly it actually did happen, supposedly, back 20 or 30 years ago. But
Jesus.
Now that it's a little bit more, I think you don't care about your rank nearly as much as it did back then, as much as kind of your work experience. And there's other ways to get jobs now, as opposed to just saying I graduated third in my class.
Right. Yeah. So what did you do as deputy district attorney for Contra Costa?
Yeah. So for Contra Costa, it was my first job out of law school. Started as a law clerk, where you did kind of some of the background work, but not in court too much. You graduate law school in, I think, early May. And then you study for the bar all year. You take the bar at the end of summer. And then you don't get your results back until the week before Thanksgiving. So you're still not an attorney 6 months after you finish law school, at least in California. I think you can go to other states and they get it done quicker. But in California, you're there for a while. Then it costs a lot of money to get sworn in and become an attorney. So you usually wait until December 1st. So that's when everybody in my class got sworn in, was December 1st of that year. So did a lot of background and writing and researching until you actually got sworn in. Once you got sworn in, you did it all. We had everything from, getting kind of worked through step back. The best way to describe what we did is kind of walk you through each step of a criminal case that we were involved in. And so if you were to say, go out, do something silly, get arrested, police write a report, they drop that report off at the DA's office to then see if they get charges filed on. Right? Just because you may have committed a crime doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to be brought up on charges.
Right.
The police say, look, I think they did it. I have probable cause to believe that they committed X crime. I'm going to refer that to the DA's office to see if they can file a charge on it. So we get the police report, and you really start looking at, okay, not only did it happen, but can I prove it? And is it in the interest of justice to go after it? So there's a few different ways that you look at it. So you want to see kind of, is the potential defendant, are they actually being the victim of human trafficking if it's a prostitution sting? Is it really somebody we want to bring up on charges, or is it somebody we want to try and get off the street and get out of a human trafficking situation? So you really kind of dig into each case. You want to make sure we've got the proof. If they said it was on video, that we get the video. So then you look it up. Then you take what the police described in there and you actually apply the law to it and figure out which charges stick. which ones apply. Police officers are trained and they're pretty dang good at figuring out which crime was committed that they're writing the report about. And every once in a while, we find some extra ones that apply or maybe fit better. So then we charge it. We actually sign the name. We put the complaint into the system, and the person's brought up on the charges. You go, you arraign the person. They say not guilty, and we start working on the case. Usually that involves you work with their defense attorney. You get them all the evidence that they're supposed to have, and you start talking about the case and whether it'll plea bargain or if it looks like it's going to go to trial. So you do a few of those kind of pretrial conferences, meetings, talking to them, trying to reach a solution that works. 99% of cases settled. Contra Costa had a lot more cases not settled in other places. They do a lot more trials, but overall, in most cases still settled by and large. So you talk to them, hey, this guy's got X mitigating circumstance, so I know normally you give 20 days as a sentence for this guy for a plea bargain. But if you take a look at this circumstance, we really think maybe 5 is more appropriate. Or instead of going back to prison, or not prison, but going back to jail for the weekend, what if we gave him an ankle monitor where he was, under house arrest for a month? Things like that. So you just kind of take it from the filing stage. We would do the trials. We did about a trial a month there. So you do a trial for 4 or 5 days, and then you got the appeals too. So after, if you get a conviction, they usually appeal it, and so you end up handling a lot of the appeals too. So I had one case go all the way up to the California Supreme Court. So you just kind of follow it the whole way, and it's a pretty interesting and great experience to get trial work and appellate work and everything all in the same job.
So how long of a process is that over the span of like months, I guess? Because I imagine it would take a while.
Yeah. So there's kind of 2 paths those cases tend to take. One is if the defendant's in custody, they tend to happen relatively fast. Okay. And if they're not in custody, they tend to take a lot longer. These are mostly misdemeanors. You start off, you're on misdemeanors, so it's things like petty thefts, simple batteries, car burglaries, things like that. People being on drugs, drug possession, some weapons that aren't guns, charges. So kind of serious to people who aren't in the criminal life, but not the big stuff. After about 2.5 years, that's when you moved up to felonies. And you really started kind of getting the heavy things. Third strikers, robberies, places where people really physically got hurt. And you have more of the kind of traditional victim that you see on TV shows. So yeah, it could take, sometimes it was over in a couple weeks. We got the guy on video doing something he shouldn't be doing. Yeah. Pretty open and shut case. There's not a lot of wiggle room for them to fight. Mm-hmm. One of the biggest fights usually was about drug treatment. So people that have drug crimes or drug adjacent crimes. So, a lot of times when you're going into Safeway and you're stealing a bunch of batteries or baby formula or something, right? A lot of times, not always, but sometimes that's because you're addicted to drugs and you need money for those. So if they've got kind of drug crimes or drug addicted crimes related, we really like to try and get them into the treatment. Unfortunately, that's not something they can be sentenced kind of in the normal course. It's basically something that they have to agree to do as part of the plea bargain. So we got a lot of pushback from that because in general, we want a 90-day inpatient drug treatment. We say we did, I'm no longer a deputy DA, but we want 90-day inpatient because that's what works a lot better. You actually live in the treatment program for 90 days and you don't really focus on anything else in your life. The problem is for a lot of misdemeanor crimes, the alternative is like 10 days in jail. So it's a lot less disruptive for your life to go to jail for 10 days than go into a treatment program for 90. Yeah. So a lot of it was trying to work and find kind of equitable ways to help people who are addicted or to make it not quite as disruptive to people who made a one-time mistake, so that their life isn't ruined in like some people, like committing crimes does for some people. So that's what we focused on a lot of.
Yeah, that's a shame. Would you say it's a friendly experience between you guys at the DA office and the defense attorneys?
No.
No.
Especially that particular county, the DA's office and the public defender's office tend to be pretty adversarial, more than normal. A lot of the private defense attorneys were less adversarial. But in particular, there's, some different views on how criminal justice should be administered and what justice is between those two offices that kind of at a certain level make it fundamentally hard to agree on everything.
Yeah.
Both I think are pretty entrenched in their ways, both sides of that. There's not really a lot of people willing to work on it on either side.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. All right, Akira?
So overall, okay. So we heard you went to the California Supreme Court. Would you like to explain part of that?
Yeah. So it was just one of my misdemeanor cases that I had. There was a fairly interesting question of law that had to do with it. And most appeals happen after the fact, after the case is resolved, and then you do an appeal. Sometimes during a case where you're like, this shouldn't even be a case, you can take what's called a writ. And so they took a writ up, and then they keep kind of elevating it to different levels of court. And each level of court kept, making a decision. Then they would go to the next step. Eventually made it all the way up to the Supreme Court of California, trying to figure out whether or not this guy should be charged with a certain crime.
So
it wasn't a lot to it. It was something the sheriff's office and his attorney were handling mostly. I was kind of the real party in interest, the person who cared about the outcome but wasn't involved in the underlying court order. So we weren't too heavily involved. It was still a pretty cool process and eye-opening, and something very few people get to do at all in their legal career, especially a year and a half into their legal career.
So does that happen often then? I imagine not, since you said.
No, out of my class that I started with, out of 7 people, I'm the only one, at least after the time when I left, that had a case go all the way up there like that.
Wow. How did you come to join Danko-Meredith after the time?
Yeah. So for a few reasons, it's time to leave the DA's office. Realized that about a year before I actually left. And one of those is that my wife and I got married during my time at the DA's office. We were going to be starting a family, and we're both from the peninsula. So we both moved down, to San Mateo area at that point. And Contra Costa DA's office works out of Martinez, which is about an hour and a half away. So 3 hours of daily commute each day made that pretty tough. Additionally, I had somewhat fallen out with criminal law, and because it was so adversarial, because it seemed like both sides were so entrenched, and I didn't particularly like the culture at the office. It made sense to leave criminal law and go to do something else. So with a lot of trial experience, I want to do trial work, which is where you're in court more and you actually litigate stuff as opposed to read documents and edit things. So we asked around. I've got some friends who do this kind of law, and hey, do you know anybody at a firm that's good and that you'd recommend me working for? And got hooked up with them, and I've been there for about 2.5 years.
Awesome. Cool. Akira?
So overall, what is your favorite part about being a lawyer? So just very broad, but.
Yeah. So I think it's really comes down to the same thing that was my favorite part about being a social worker, which is get to help people. Right. Mostly what I'm focused on now at Danko-Meredith is we work on people that were affected by the PG&E fires over the last few years who lost their home. And you get their stories and you're trying to get them back on their feet and get their life back. At the DA's office, it was, fighting societally for justice, but also, for the victims. Right? It's you're fighting for something, and so still being able to do that just at a little bit different way than I was at social work is really what's appealing. You kind of look back at most of those jobs, and they're all dealing with somebody in a crisis, and so it's just it's not something I really think consciously about. What's the best thing? This is why I do it, but just kind of at the end of the day, when you look back and think about what you got out of it, it's knowing that you're helping people that, lets you go to sleep.
That's awesome.
Yeah, that's awesome, being able to help people like that. Just
I had a question. I forgot it. Oh my God. Okay. Never mind. It was a joke question, but I forgot it. So that kind of softens the punchline. I was going to ask, how much like the movies is it, would you say?
You mean like in court?
Yeah.
So generally it's not too much like the movies. But one of my very first trial actually was kind of shortly after Trayvon Martin happened. And, at a much smaller scale than there is now. But there was a lot of, dissatisfied people about how that case ended up. It was on the minds of a lot of people. And my very first trial was had an African-American defendant and who was wearing a hoodie. And so the defense attorney really started insinuating all these awful things about our police officers that were in the case. At one point, I forgot exactly what she said, but she said something just completely outlandish. Something like, and you think every black man in a sweatshirt is a criminal or something like that. Some totally ridiculous in front of the jury with everybody there. And that one I did just slap the table, stand up, and yell objection, just like they do in the movie. But other than that, it's not very, not nearly as dramatic as to make it seem in TV.
Yeah. All right. So I guess we'll close out with, do you have any advice for anyone seeking a career in law?
Yeah. Go get jobs at law firms. Kind of doing whatever you can, even if you're, doing fairly grunt level work, you're still going to get exposed to a lot of how the law actually works and how offices works and how a career looks like in the law. So you really just want to try and dip your toe into it. It's something I had not done previously. And I think it's, I've been pretty lucky and worked hard to get everything, but I think it would have been a lot different and I would have had a lot better sense of what's going on had I had exposure to law firms and the law beforehand. But yeah, take your classes. If you like poli-sci kind of things, that tends to line up well with doing well on the LSAT and succeeding in law school. It's a lot of writing. So, if you go to school and you do a bunch of math, not that you can't be a lawyer, but somebody else is going to have a lot more practice probably writing 20-page papers. And just talk to people. It's not as scary as it seems. The bar exam is pretty tough, but it's not like it's unpassable. Mm-hmm. So don't be scared of it. Just, always be looking around and trying to get exposure to the field.
Gotcha. All right. Thank you for joining us today. We're glad to have you. I'm going to ask you for one final favor. We need a thumbnail for the YouTube video. So if you can just make a pose or something, thumbs up or something, or smile. Yeah.
Okay. Let's see how boomer I can look by leaning into the camera here real quick.
There you go.
Okay.
That's awesome. There you go. All right. Jacob, let me know.
Oh, yeah, you're good. Yep.
All right, great.
Hey, thank you so much, Brad.
Thank you.
Great
Good luck,
job.
guys. When do you guys? Are you guys graduating? How's it all going down? This
Sophomores.
For sophomores.
Yeah. Nice. Good job.
Yeah. This week's our last week of school, so.
Yeah.
All right.
So we're closing out with and I'm leaving D-Tech, unfortunately. So
No.
we're closing out the podcast as well. So we're leaving it the final 5. So we've got our final 5 guests.
Oh, wow.
We appreciate you being one of them.
Yeah, well, thank you very much. Good luck, guys.
Thank you so much. All right. Take care.